All right, my name is Tyson Barker, and I'm from the Aspen Institute, Germany. I think that was a great scene setter for the discussions that are going to take place the rest of the day. We are going to start now with a discussion on artificial intelligence and safety. There will be other discussions today on media and on digital rights, but what we want to do is start right on the edge of this conversation. What's going to be happening next? What is artificial intelligence? Why do we care? Why does this matter for democracy? So I want to start by just setting the stakes a little bit before I bring up the panelists. We are experiencing nothing less than being present at the creation of the rules that are going to govern us for the next decades. We're at a very similar position that the internet was in the late 80s and early 90s. And if we don't get these rules right here in Ukraine, in Europe, in the Euro-Atlantic, we're going to be living with the values that we set in place for years to come. So I want to bring up the panelists right now to discuss this. Let's start with Merle Maigre. Merle, can you come on up? Merle is the Executive Vice President for Government Relations at CybExer Technologies, and she is really one of the leading voices on cybersecurity. She's had every hat you can think of. She's advised two presidents in Estonia. She led the Center of Excellence on Cybersecurity at Nato. So, Merle, thank you. Welcome to the panel. Next, we have Oleksiy Skrypnyk. Oleksiy, come on up. Oleksiy might be familiar to some of you. He served in the Rada and then went on to found Eleks, which is a leading IT company here in Ukraine. And finally, we have Maxim Prasolov. Maxim, come on up. Maxim is a serial entrepreneur. He is the founder of Neuromation, which is an animating video technology firm that works with artificial intelligence to create animation, to create videos, but has worked in other areas with a lot of other general purpose technologies, including blockchain. So, Maxim, let me go ahead and start with you. We heard in the last discussion that one of the challenges, one of the real problems that we're looking at is an erosion of trust in institutions. We are now bringing online artificial intelligence, not just in the physical world, in connected cars, in power plants, in the way we regulate transportation in urban settings, but also how we regulate our interactions with each other. Both online with digital social media, but also hiring, admissions decisions, healthcare decisions, criminal justice decisions. What values do we need to put in place to create trust?
Well, thank you for the question. And I suppose the most important what we should know about artificial intelligence, that's definitely in every case, we have human behind it. And we should talk about human-centric artificial intelligence. And to be honest, we don't have any intelligence behind. We have artificial, but we don't have intelligence. And ethical problem with using AI in different verticals, mostly it's human responsibility. It's responsibility of creator of artificial intelligence. So, and when we're talking about what the consequences of using AI in different in different branches, in different verticals, the main issue is ethical question of the creators of artificial intelligence. And I don't think so that it's we have some general solution or general rules or general regulations for all AI technologies in the world, because it's also depend on human biases. It depends on human behavior. And you can compare it to early stage internet, it's like 20 years ago, so everybody was scared, so what does internet bring to us? At the same time, we have absolutely the same situation with AI.
So are we automating our biases? How do we counteract that? What is the role of governments to counteract that, or civil society?
Well, the rules it's pretty interesting. In different scale, for example, how to regulate deepfakes. How to regulate AI powered on text generation. For like $50,000, we can create on GTI2 a system which is create millions of publications on different topics. There is no journalist behind. And you cannot differentiate the texts created by AI and created by human. How to detect deepfakes? I can put words in your mouth, in the mouth of all politicians using our technology, for example. With the voice, with the face, with the spelling, with everything. How to differentiate deepfake, for example? It's like how to regulate deepfake. Do we have like some detection system of deepfake? Not so far. Facebook said we pay $10 million for every company who create detection machine for deepfake. We are also like participant of this competition, and we know this is very hard work because we know our job pretty well. So we do our job pretty well. So in several months, I suppose, it's like some Chinese companies can create absolutely synthetic media. All synthetic, so text, people on the screen, everything. How you can differentiate the real people from artificial people on the screen? How we can regulate it? So do we need just to refuse it and say, oh, we don't need it, just stop it? No, it's impossible. Because a ton of troll in the internet using this technology create a lot of deepfakes through the YouTube and spreading through social media. It's very complicated question, you know, so that's what I'm talking about. So this ethical question is it behind of technology. It's inside of human mind.
Yeah. Oleksiy, you know, the world is watching Ukraine when we think about, you know, what could happen, what are the possibilities with cybersecurity and with cyber attacks. A lot of what we've seen, be it the attacks on the power grid here in 2015, 2016, be it the attacks on the Central Election Commission, we see here what we can expect to happen in Europe and the United States and Canada and elsewhere in the future. Having been on both sides, both in government, both as an elected official and now outside watching this and working on this as a practitioner, what keeps you up at night looking in the next 3 to 5 years?
Hello. First, a few important remarks because I am very positively surprised with what my colleague is saying, because I think it's necessary to explain to colleagues who are not in the field that for now, the artificial intelligence exists only in the PowerPoint presentations. There's no such things as artificial intelligence. It's absolutely marketing trick. It's something like problem of 2000. Before, for those people who remember, we have such things as expert systems who were the same in the 80s. So this is a possibility of making of good money to the IT companies, first of all. It's very important things to know. Of course, if you will name it deep learning or reinforcement learning, it will be looking absolutely another, and for most of people, I always say, but all people say, oh, AI, it's going about the Terminator, Sarah Connor, and all this stuff, so it's mostly people, when we are talking about the safety and artificial intelligence, is mostly going to this field. We will have in nearest future intelligence robot who will take over the government, etc., etc. So I think there's here one of the set of the problem. But there is another set of the problem, which my colleagues has mentioned, which is a real problem of what is going now in this field, in reinforcement learning, in deep learning, in these problems where there's a lot of ethical and safety problems which is existing. So, and they're real, they're very serious, especially taking into consideration the military field. Because when we are talking about the machine learning, we see great progress in image recognition. I think it's with a neutral language processing, image recognition, maybe the two fields which is developed highly, and we will see the patents they're growing very fast, so on. So this is a real field where we have a really crazy progress. So from the other side, we see the mention of Artur Gerasimov, the Chief of General Staff of Russia, who said that we wanted to return back to the borders of the Soviet Union, except Baltic states, in 2023. And we see that they investigate robots in Syria for possibility of using robots as a military force, and see that there is some big problems with these robots, especially taking into consideration the problem, technical problem, which is very serious latency of the whole system. So using image recognition for such robots, it will be the solution of maybe not all, but a lot of problems. So very soon, maybe we'll have not the Terminators in the frame of movie, but we'll have robots who will be managed, as my colleague mentioned, at the backstage it will be the humans who will be managing robots, but who will use artificial intelligence in moving, in shooting, etc., etc. So this is becoming a real problem. So I think that we need to talk about this level of the problematic, which is absolutely real and realistic, and how we have to respond. So this is the bad news. The good news, that the community of people who, especially in science field, are busy with the AI, are mostly aware of this. So, and this is a strong movement of the people who wanted to see the whole models, to develop, to see for what these models are going, how they are using, and how it's possible to prevent the sequences which we can next roll back. So there will be no undo operation for such things. That's why the real scientists are really afraid of this. In this case, it's also important, you see, we have this way of artificial intelligence nationalism, which is coming especially in Germany, Europe, China. I think it's necessary to all people who are interested in this field to read the book about the AI in China. There is a very good example, which I think it's necessary to tell to the community, which is giving the whole picture. The Chinese said that for them losing in Go from artificial intelligence, it was something like for Americans losing in a space context from Soviet Union in the 60s. So this was the big... So now China investing a huge amount of money, and from what we see, in what field they're investing, to say that this is democracy, it's a little bit tricky. So this is just like, and this is the current problems, it's not like a future one. So that's why, my opinion, it's very necessary to have a serious, technical, professional conversation in this field in Ukraine, because ignoring these problems will be resulted in a very bad things in the next few years. What amount of time we have, nobody knows. Because here is also another problem, which is technical. It's very easy to explain. A lot of people who are engineers remember the problems of the engines for the planes, which was with the big cylinders, so it's like it was 16 amount of different cylinders, and it was stopped, the progress was stopped. There was no possibility to have planes who is flying high, etc., etc. But then they were invented the turbines, and they changed everything. So this is the key problem for now. Everybody afraid of the possibility of creating such turbines which can change everything. And not be in a field, not putting their fingers on the pulse, at the end will end that other will have turbines and will have no one. This is, I think, the biggest strategic problem. Besides this, I think we all colleagues, we have to talk now about the tactical operational problems, like with face recognition, with these all fallacy systems, etc., which is necessary, job cuts off, etc. What we have to teach kids to be aware of the whole situation in the field, how have to be people educated when big amount of stupid jobs will be taken out of the market, etc. I think here, this is a real problem which have to be discussed.
Just one quick follow-up, because you mentioned facial recognition and voice recognition as two AI applications that are currently being applied and could have an effect on open society and democracy. We see this from everywhere from Xinjiang to King's Cross in the UK, that facial recognition technology is being applied. Do you think that this is a net positive, and how do you think that this should be regulated?
If I have understanding how, it's like a genie who is taken out of the bottle, and now it's a question, in all tales we all see how the genie is coming, but the question how to put him back into the bottle. And my opinion that this is impossible, and we have to live in this reality. And I think that initiative which Facebook is now doing of trying to determine the false things which is created by artificial intelligence is the right way. But the problem that we have this, you remember this rocket, anti-rocket, rocket, anti-rocket competition. In the case of artificial intelligence, there is no limit. There's no limit for the quality. It's still because it's more statistical, it's more variation things, so we cannot receive 100% quality, but it's really hard to determine things. So we have to live in this post-truth society where you cannot guarantee nothing in the case of seeing any image or any video, not dependable what quality this video will be. So this is the current problem where we have to determine special measures how we have to live in this society.
Merle, you have worked extensively on cybersecurity. You've experienced all of these attacks in Estonia, in Ukraine. You've been watching this. You've been working at Nato on these at the highest levels. How do we make sure we're not fighting the last battle? What do we need to be aware of for the next battle when artificial intelligence starts to come online in malware, in other applications that could affect the security and safety of our devices and applications?
Thank you. Right questions. When preparing for the next battle, I think it's important to define the framework of the battle and to understand what the battle is about. And on AI, similarly, it is important to understand first the limits and the opportunities of what we're discussing about. Well, all in all this discussion, the risks related to it are quite natural. We are afraid of possible implications in a world where human decision-making and thought process plays less of a role in day-to-day society than we are usually used to. The risks are obvious, especially when speaking of AI related to weapon systems, because from one end, lack of human oversight and of the functioning of AI-enabled weapons systems might lead to indiscriminate actions. Non-state actors can lead behavior that violates international law, and there's the concern of proliferation. From the other end, however, it's important to maintain that advocates of AI argue that AI, such intelligence can actually improve our decision-making. It can improve the logistics of the functioning of our society, and it can help us interpret and read data and ultimately improve our reaction times to data. So the first point here when preparing for the next battle is to maintain that what are the limits of humans remaining in control of AI. The debate is about whether humans remain in the loop of this machine learning, meaning that humans constantly monitor the operation and remain in charge of the machines, or then humans being on the loop, meaning that humans supervising the machines are able to intervene at any time. Or the third option, humans being out of the loop, meaning that machines carrying out this mission without human intervention. So it's important to orient yourself first in this debate, and the principles that many Western establishments insist is that humans should remain in control. That's a principle, for example, also underlined by the European Parliament in its decision in September last year about that called for meaningful human control over the critical function of various weapon systems. Now, when you first also discussed and brought out the question of how we can have more trust towards the AI systems, when addressing the role of the policymakers and regulators, I think it's important to maintain that while the policymakers don't need to understand every little detail of this discussion, they need to have an understanding that sufficient understanding to be able to assess the strength or the weight of their decisions on the national security systems, on the impact of the society and on international society. So that understanding starts from asking the right questions, such as, for example, how can we make the future AI systems robust enough so that they can do what we want without the malfunctioning, without getting hacked. That is one set of questions important to ask for the decision makers. Secondly, how can we update our legal systems so that they would be more fair and efficient, but also keeping pace with the AI? And this, I think, this touches the very issue that you brought out earlier, the conflict or the different approaches that China, with its face recognition approach, has taken to AI, and then at the same time you have similar systems in place in King's Cross, the CCTV, as you say. And this, for me, is the question of how important it is to have the big data systems that function in a way like oil. Data is oil, but in order to return value of that oil, we need refineries. And the question is that these refineries remain under democratic control, so that a state where human may be in control, as they are in China, would not take the AI-led systems to the extreme and undermine the basic democratic values. Last but not least, I think when discussing this preparation for the next battle, it's important to maintain that that four functions are met. Four main areas of the technical AI discussion that are being pursued, and that is verification, validation, security, and control. Verification meaning to check whether we built the systems right, whether the systems, the AI systems that we built, meet the criteria that we set out. Validation is about whether we built the right systems, whether this is something we wanted to achieve. Security is about making sure that these systems are not hacked, that are not malfunctioned, and control relates to the fact that human at any point is able to control the system. Last but not least, in maintaining that we prepare for the right battle, I think it's crucial to remember that the AI systems are only as moral and as intelligent as the people programming them. Therefore, it's crucial to make sure that when we develop the artificial intelligence and artificial brains and machine learning, we also invest into the research that goes into the ethics and the impact and the check of the impact that the AI has on societal processes. So this discussion and debate between the big companies, NGOs, and researchers, a dialogue that makes clear what we're talking about is very important in this.
Let me take this point that you just said, which is, you know, these algorithms are only a mirror of the societies that create them, of the engineers that create them, and the processes that govern them. You mentioned the idea, particularly in the military context, of the importance of being on the loop, that a human needs to be somehow involved. Clearly that's a moral, moral idea, but it could come with trade-offs, like efficiency. Having a human in the loop or on the loop could limit the speed and accuracy with which certain technologies could perform in the battlefield. Are we certain that this kind of moral imperative of having a human in the loop or on the loop is globally shared?
No, definitely not. And this is why we need to keep on having this discussion. But this discussion needs to be led in an intelligent way, especially when referring to AI systems in the military. There are many movements that are so-called stop the killer robots movements, where I'm puzzled a lot, because these movements assume that automatically that the AI systems are related to evil killer robots, whereas a technology cannot be a military per se or a civilian per se. And when banning a technology, we can sort of throw out the baby with the water. So it's important to regulate these issues with a deeper understanding at what we're talking about, maintaining at the same time that all kinds of regulations involve financial issues as well. So not always one should carefully reflect when setting down a regulation.
Yes, please.
Can I add, just because my colleague is mentioning about very important problem, which is now one of the most highest problem, is the verification of the data. And there is existing a very nice example, which I think to the public it will be interesting to hear, when there were, because most of systems are built on education, but it's more statistical education, and we cannot guarantee that the model is right. It was an interesting experiment when the system were determined between the cats and wolves, and the wolves was mostly making the photos in a wood, in most frozen wood, etc., with different woods. But at the end, the people found that they educated to determine the system between the cats and wood, but not between the cats and wolves. It's interesting, and this is just like very complicated system. It's just Google is now greatly investing into understanding what models we are building. It's a very, very complicated mathematical problem. It's a very problem of very high level intellectual efforts to understand, because these models which we have for now are very, we are not, in a lot of cases we are not understanding how they're working. And it's also necessary to mention that in some cases they are more precise than the people understanding of the things that the people are doing. But not in all fields. I mean, mostly in image recognition, there can be better results that the average people are showing. But in general, you understand that this is becoming a very complicated problem of verification and validation, which is, so you cannot guarantee, and it's still the probabilities. There will be no system, for now, it's the existing approaches, which can give you 100% guarantee. This is very important things.
Maxim, just to take up this point of verification and this idea of human in the loop, what we seem to be talking about is how do we create communities that represent all stakeholders in countries like Ukraine, in Europe, et cetera, that are creating the guidelines to make sure that this is a moral, we're bringing on moral processes online, that we're deploying moral processes. Are you satisfied with the conversations that you're having with policymakers here in Kiev?
Well, we should understand that one thing, like AI regulation should try to incorporate the values of privacy, safety, and ethical decision-making. And on top of it, the policymaker cannot do that by themselves, only with cooperation with AI practitioners and the companies. Because, you know, the imagine about artificial intelligence, it's mostly from sci-fi movie. It definitely not. You're absolutely right. It's all about statistical model and probabilistic method, how to determine the results of the algorithm working. So we cannot say that we have 100% decision based on AI. No. We should talk about a hybrid system, human-centric AI, where an AI helps to the human to make a decision. And when we're talking with policymakers, they should explain that, okay, AI can help with digitalization, but at the same time it brings a lot of ethical problem. For example, when AI just analyze my health statement, and after that brings this data to the insurance company, and after that brings this data, for example, for my bank, and my bank decided, oh, we should increase the percentage of your loan because you have a risk of cancer. Is it an ethical question or what? What about my privacy? What about my safety? Do we need to regulate that from on the government side? So there are a lot of questions, and safety, privacy, and ethical decision-making, it's a basic value for all AI regulation.
So are there some red lines where AI should not touch and make decisions in healthcare decisions, in other areas?
Well, it's also very complicated. You know, we live in a de-anonymized world. So for 15 points of the data, I can just eliminate everybody in this room without your names, just for your behavior in the network. So this is very, very complicated thing. What is the privacy? But my data belong to me. That is the main point of me. My data belongs not to Facebook, not to Google. It belongs to me. And if somebody just want to sell my data, I want to get royalty for it. It's fair enough.
We just have to remember that AI is only instrument in the hands of people. So let's stop talking about AI. Let's talk about the decision which people are making. This is more important in this case, and I fully agree with Maxim. So this is just like more, it's instruments, something like microscope, but more sophisticated. We are just step in the progress, and it's like with the nuke bomb, the same problem. People were pressing the button. Here, people are using the system in an appropriate way. So we have not to talk about the AI, which giving possibilities from one side to determine if it will be obfuscate data, to determine the cancer correlation with the genome. I think all people in the world will agree for this. That is necessary investigation, yes, which help to prevent cancer distribution and so on, all diseases. But from the other hands, we see that the people start using, the corporations start using data, and in an appropriate way. Not in a lot of cases, it's just big models data, whereas there is no AI in a mathematical point of view. No, this machine learning or deep learning or reinforcement learning or some other models. So it can be just normal algorithms for analysis. But the people are using them. So we have to think about this way.
So, I mean, you're right to mention that this is pattern recognition processes. In a lot of cases, this isn't necessarily AI. Sometimes it does get conflated. But you also mentioned the idea that in some cases we're letting the genie out of the bottle. So to what extent should we have anticipatory regulation, anticipatory governance for things that we can already see coming, at least in the midterm, in the next 3 to 5 years?
It's interesting that you predict in 3 or 5 years later we'll have this point of singularity. Yes, it's just like everybody thinking about, okay, there will be no human after this. I think that's a good analogy will be with the nuke and with the letter from Albert Einstein to understand that the genie, big genie is out of the bottle. So from that moment we are still living. We are still able to determine the whole situation. The mankind has a huge amount, especially environment problem with the climate, etc., with all problems which we have now. Some of them resolving. So my opinion that with the case of this genie, we have to have a very serious conversation. The problem is that on the government level in all countries, we see the people who are absolutely not understanding the nature of this genie. So they are thinking, as I already mentioned, mostly in the terms of Sarah Connor and the button where we have to press the terminator to stop it. So they're not understanding the realistic problems we have now. You can see this from the debates in the American Senate and Congress, where the people asking about the internet, very common question, which is looking for the most people absolutely stupid. So expect the same level of the government people all around the world. So, and these people will make decisions about very complicated problems. So in this case, we have to educate, we have to explain, and of course, the common discussion, especially ethical discussions, are very important, because we have to predict, because there's a problem of mathematical model of ethic, how to prevent, how to create in terms which is understanding people this 3 law of robotechnics from Isaac Asimov to prevent the possibility of development of strong AI and to prevent this situation. I think it's necessary level of the discussion, involvement of a big amount of people from different spheres, because it's not only a mathematical problem, it's more brain investigation problem, etc. So it's a lot of a lot of spheres, and to discuss this, to predict this in advance, to be more smart than we are now, understanding to what problems we come if there will no prevention of this in advance.
Merle, you wanted to jump in?
Yes, when, if I recall correctly, your question was about how to bring on board all the right stakeholders and what to do with them. Well, I am not an expert on Ukraine, but I know how we do it in Estonia. Estonia, together with Finland and Sweden, is one of the few countries that has actually adopted at government level the strategy on AI. And a way of getting there, the path of getting there was involved close dialogue with various stakeholders who have a chip in this game. Discussion and dialogue, that's what the state can do. Also, the strategy itself, what it does is that lays out some certain principles that guide this game. As you well said, there are lots of uncertainties, and I don't think we should jump into regulating what we are uncertain about. But it's okay to agree some principles, rules of the game, and that indeed involves the role of the state vis-à-vis the private citizens' safety and privacy, data privacy, and from one end, and of course the European Union's GDPR that all EU member states comply with offers good ways of and vision towards that path. So the state respecting the privacy of citizens from one end, but from the other end, as is the case of Estonia, where the state offers zillions of various digital services, online services to its citizens, naturally the state, through that process, will learn a lot of big data about the country, the society, and the question is also how can the state render available this data for the private sector, for the startups, to encourage innovation and to encourage the improvement of these services further on. And what are the measures and what are the frameworks of rendering this balance? And very important in this, as I said before, is for the state to dedicate resources for the research and development, for the research of the societal impact of AI, of the research of the safety and ethics issues of the AI, so that when going ahead and setting out a strategy, this discussion would be on a educated level, so that there are some researches and discussions out there already that inform this strategy making.
Maxim.
So I believe that regulation is only one part of these decisions. Like, we need to stimulate the artificial intelligence development, deep learning and machine learning. What we expect in 3 years? We expect over 2.5 million jobs, new jobs. AI will create new jobs. We expect that global impact for GDP also will increase with 1.3 trillion, powered by AI. And front runner of this big AI race, like developed countries, will take about 25% of this stake. When you're talking about interest of stakeholders, we're talking about interest of private companies, of the government, of taxpayers as well. And we should also discuss the policy, not only regulation, but stimulation of this industry as well. And Ukraine, the country with one of the highest level of abstract mathematics education, can also join this race. And I totally disagree with Noel Harari, who said that country like Ukraine will just never win this race. I disagree. We can. And that's why we keep our development office in Ukraine, and a lot of companies also hire the high-level specialists here. And that's why a Ukrainian startup also will reach the billion-dollar capitalization based on AI technology. And emerging countries have a chance in case of high level of mathematical education. And stimulation of this, stimulation of a digital innovation hub with all technologies is an issue, and also it's a government problem. We should talk about two things, regulation and stimulation as well.
Thank you so much, especially for bringing in the positives, because obviously this is an immensely disruptive technology. We're talking about general purpose technologies, and we tend to focus a lot on what kind of controls we can put in place, but if it's all negative, then why are we even doing this? So it's good to bring up the idea that this is going to make our lives better. Question for you, Oleksiy. You brought up the idea of a race, and this keeps coming up. In other technologies, blockchain technologies, quantum computing, I don't think we talk as much about a race necessarily. Why are we following into this race paradigm? Where does Ukraine sit in that race? And is the race mentality even helpful?
Honestly, there is no place of Ukraine in this race. We don't see ourselves on the picture of AI. I mean about amount of the publication, or how to measure, or about the amount of startups, amount of investment money. We are 0.0 in all these values. So there is a few players where the most important are United States and China for now. A little bit European Union, but it's just like it's a little bit tricky. More Canada and Great Britain. So this is the key players for artificial intelligence for now. What will be, we have no clue for, so we can only predict how it will go from this point of view, from the racing. From the other technologies, I can say that it just like, we also have to take this problem of the hype. You know, so this problem is existing. So we see that, for example, for the blockchain, it's like more, we already on the, not down, but maybe on the more understanding where we have to use it. So it's just, you know, the old problems which we have now in a society very digitalized, when everybody has now the iPhone, which is more powerful than in 1 million times than computer which I started when I started programming. So everybody now have powerful computer, you know. So everybody thinking that they are understanding, and especially it was really tricky to see how the people were trying to put, and still trying to put, blockchain everywhere where possible and where not possible. So the same is with artificial intelligence. We see this hype of the overusage or not understanding the technology. And this is just like giving us that its hype will go a little bit down and there will be normal development. I expected that this will happen, and this gives us the hope, and also for Ukraine to have its small amount of development. Plus, it's also the big difference in ML field, in machine learning, that most of algorithms are now opened. So this is just like, and there is a competition between the people, between the scientists, between the industries. And I think that this is just greatly positive news for the whole people in the world, because this is giving also to any country possibility, and to the people in the country, to be on the edge, to be on the top, not depend on, so we have to have only mathematical and computer science education, rather good to understand, but you can be on the top. So it's not like covered, it's not like not understandable. But the level will be also determined by the level of educational system. So this is the huge problem. So less mathematics in secondary school, less physics, the old-fashioned informatics with the old-fashioned languages, this cutting our possibility to be in the top. So I think this is the key problem for now, from strategic point of view, to invest into the modern education, to do what Estonia is doing in the field of like so Estonia is like a good example to follow, like we are now following in 20 years in a government, in e-government solutions, which Estonia did 15 or 20 years ago. So I think we have to be a little bit more smart to follow Estonia now and to create our AI strategy quicker than in 20 years.
Maxim, do you agree with that assessment? Is this the recipe? Is Estonia the model to follow? What other elements do you see as possible to get Ukraine in the midterm in the race?
Of course. As also the owner of Estonian company, Estonian e-resident, I can say, of course, the problem is we don't have Ukrainian startup, because we don't have Ukrainian startup on paper. We have a ton of Ukrainian startup registered out of Ukraine. Because of different problem inside the country, by regulation, taxation, etc. A lot of Ukrainian companies working at the offshore companies, or a lot of IT companies. We know that problem. And it's also a governmental problem and regulation problem. Just how to create the climate for IT companies in Ukraine who can operate worldwide. Why we need to be registered outside of our country. So it's a great problem for like 4 years. It's from different kind of governmental support and unfriendly action of our government for the last years for 2 IT companies, for example, just to take out their servers and to come and want just to blackmail them. So we know all this problem. Of course, Estonia, it's one of the beautiful, peaceful hub for IT companies. That's why we're here. And regarding the education, 100% agree. We should invest in mathematics in school, everywhere. If we want just to see ourselves in the middle of this race, we should invest now. You're talking about how many time we have? Months, not years. Definitely months, because the race already began.
Merle, you want to respond about Estonia being the model for Ukraine to follow?
Yes, I'd like to respond to that. While it's of course pleasant to hear that, and I am proud, it's important for also for Estonia to recognize that some of the success of the country today is thanks to the bold decision of politicians made about some 15, 20 years ago. The success is thanks to the wisdom and hard work of the bureaucrats of the state administration fulfilling those political decisions, and thanks to the private sector, innovative companies allowing to come up with technology, making it happen. But while technology always is important, it's important to maintain that that technology may exist, but it is about the people, about the culture, about the legislation, and the mentality that makes things happen. And it's very important for me as an Estonian to remind oneself that while Estonia may have made the right decisions 15, 20 years ago, it's important not to rest on laurels. It's important not to stand. In order to keep to stand still, you need to keep on running. And for the Estonian political leadership, I think there is a constant requirement to keep that community together as for the state, for the political decision makers, not to drop the ball, not to remain complacent on this cozy, warm idea of, oh, how good we are, because it is a vision that requires constant homework, constant political drive. Where next? What's the future? And if you stop, then you undermine the trust of all these people who have invested into using all these digital services, because you cannot afford to stop. You need to keep on investing, if at least to maintain the cybersecurity side of it, because threats, as we all know, keep on evolving, and the state cannot afford to stop these investments to build the resilience of the system. So while it's of course a pleasure and I am proud of my country, it's always important that Estonia keeps on thinking and striving forward and doesn't stop.
Okay, we have had a great conversation up here. We've talked about cybersecurity, we've talked about resilience, we've talked about industrial policy, the race, what even is AI, where is it being applied, how are countries approaching this differently, and now we want to turn it to you guys. There are some mics, I think here, I see one. If you have a question, please raise your hand, and I think you can ask your question in Ukrainian or English, if I'm correct. So just raise your hand and let me know. We got one. And please identify yourself.
Leonid Polyakov, retired military. I have a question to all three panelists with regard to not hypothetical threat, but real threat for Ukraine, which is Russia. Today I was waiting for the first time for someone to mention this country, and in vain. However, to the best of my knowledge, already Russian government invests huge money in selection and education in special schools, young mathematicians. Ukraine currently is far behind. I suspect China is doing probably the same, I just don't know, but I know about Russia. And if Russia will maintain this policy and somehow finds a way to keep their talents inside the country and not to allow them to move to Europe and North America or China, then in the near future we will have among the, or this is the question, is there any chance that in the near future Russia will be a strong player, well, close to China and United States in AI business? Thank you.
Okay. Let's see if we can gather two more questions. Do we have any others? Let's see. All right, maybe we'll take the answer to this first question, which is a very provocative question, and then come back to the audience. So maybe we can start on the end and just go down. The question is essentially, is Russia in the race? And what are they doing to train talent? What is their industrial policy? Are they retaining talent? Are they going to be up there among the top with China and the United States? And just what is your assessment of Russia in this game?
The assessment of Russia, whether Russia is a player in AI, I think it is clear, as you rightly pointed out, Leonid, that they invest immense resources into blending AI and more generally cyber and electronic warfare into the traditional defense and security sector. So Russia, from the Estonian perspective, is of course and always a direction one has to be very carefully to look out and to prepare for threat vectors coming from that direction. At the same time, it is an Estonian way to look at the glass being half full, and when crisis erupts, to never let crisis go to waste. So how this connects to Russia is that it keeps us on the toes, and it allows equally investments being very logical and needed in this sector, and therefore investments being made in this sector. The Estonian response has been to build more close public-private partnership in the military on cyber. One of the lessons learned of the attacks of 2007, when during the tense political relations between Estonia and Russia, cyber attacks were erupted against Estonian state and private sector. After that, we built the Cyber Defense League, which is a volunteer national organization that also involves cyber geeks that volunteer their private time to build up the resilience of the state cyber structures. Another step that Estonia has taken is cyber conscript, so that while we have always maintained the conscription system, we allow the more IT-savvy section of young men to specialize in cyber, and there is a special cyber conscription for them. Last year, Estonia also set up the Cyber Command that plays a role in building the state resilience vis-à-vis Russia. However, being involved in, thanks to EU, in Ukraine, and looking how Ukraine is building its own resilience in the election section, in the election part, I am very positively, my assessment is rather positive of Ukraine learning the lessons of the attacks and threats of 2014 over these elections in 2019 and building interagency cooperation between the main actors who are in Ukraine responsible for mitigation and detection of cyber threats, and for the different services and agencies working together, because ultimately that is what's important, that you share the information about incoming threats between various agencies, and you build techniques and procedures to stand against those threats.
Oleksiy?
No, it's an old joke about not dependable what you start building at the end. In Russia, you finish with machine gun. So I think that if we'll go out a little bit, like my colleague did, outside of artificial intelligence box, we'll see that from the viewpoint of cyber threats, Russia maybe now is the main game player. And I think they're taking everything in complexity and trying to find the weak places, or this, like was in Ukraine with this virus Petya, or with other threats, or stolen something. The problem with artificial intelligence is that if we all know about these discussions in Google of stopping investigation of machine learning algorithm for the military purpose, in Russia there is no demonstration in such field. So I think this is the key problem, and they have a very big culture of investing into the military fields in different spheres, especially taking into consideration that this is all very connected things. So that's why my opinion that such threats is maybe the biggest for now. So from the viewpoint of the possible military weapon results in the nearest future. So we have to be aware, and we have to be really understanding. And I don't know the answer, by the way. This is maybe the question to the audience. It's like was the question to the audience in the United States. How we there was two questions actually. First was how we to develop AI weapon system. Everybody say no. The next question was, we know that the China and Russia are developing the weapons based on AI. In this case, have we developed the weapons? The answer was yes, mostly. So this is the tricky situation which we have, which is very similar to the situation with the nukes. And I have no answer to it. I have nothing. My opinion that if we want to be independent, we have to. But I'm understanding that this is just like very pragmatical and very maybe cynical opinion of understanding of the person who understands the real threat from Russia to independence of Ukraine.
Maxim, very brief, and then we're going to go back to the audience.
Yeah, last year I've been in Berlin on the Aspen conference, where a lot of people been scared about a Russian autonomous nuclear submarine powered by AI. And I have to say that Russia definitely has a very good achievement in animation. Because for now, there is no answer on the question how to use AI properly in military technology. You can make an object detection machine gun. You can make a lot of drones for different investigation mission. You also can use AI for some prediction to analyze the landscape, etc. But for now, what can I say? Sarah Connor can sleep well. There is no so great threat, even in China and United States. Especially a lot of people inside the industry, like in Silicon Valley, and our company as well, we signed the Charter, OpenAI Charter, that nobody wants to develop military technology. For my company, we said we are Wall-E, we are not Terminator. So we create useful robots, something like that. But the question is, do Russia has some technology or opportunity to create this technology? Yes. But thanks to Russian corruptions, it never be happen.
Okay, we have a question here. Oh, wait, oh, sorry, you have the mic. So a question here and then a question here.
Yeah, thanks. Artem Shaipov, Professional Government Association of Ukraine. We've been talking about AI in warfare, in business, and other spheres, and I'm interested in your opinions on potential opportunities for using AI and the risks of using AI in public service and the judiciary. Could you please elaborate on this? Thank you.
Public services and the judiciary. Public services and the judiciary. All right, let's take this question as well, and then we'll go down the line. Do we have the mic? Hold on one second.
Thank you. My name is Oleksiy. I'm from Dnipro city. I heard a lot of some scary things, and we heard it a lot of times. And the question for you, is it a time to make a special organization like NATO and about the war machines, yes, and the industries in the world, and to make the same in the cyber safety alliance with the countries that have the same values? Because now we, small countries can feel itself scary, like because they have now such big budget, for example, like it has China and Russia and United States also. But now we don't have rules, we don't know our rights, and everybody use such a cheating, because nobody believes that other country, other big country, will never cheat others. So everyone cheating because we have no rules. Everybody told about industry, about safety, and about to take more budget to work on the safety. Yep. But nobody knows these rules. So the question for you, what do you think? Is it a time for new alliance to work on the cyber safety of the countries? And how could it be if yes? Thank you.
Okay. Let's take it in reverse order. So we basically have two questions. One is talking about AI applications in the judiciary and public service. What are some good examples that are out there globally? And then the second question is, and I think it's related to both cybersecurity, but perhaps also AI, is there a role for a NATO-like institution, A, to kind of govern it internally, to create a system of norms and values that can be implemented with incentives, and B, what are the consequences for those who do not implement those norms and values? Can we start with Maxim and just go the reverse, and then we'll wrap it up?
Well, I can answer for mostly first question. So what kind of application based on AI we should use? Of course, different kind of data science and big data analyzers to predict different kind of markets, like labor market in the country. For AI application, different scoring application, and also fraud detection on the governmental level, and probably like corruption monitor based on AI, which is seems absolutely right efforts for the government, and it's doable.
And Mexico is very focused on this.
Yeah, in Mexico. So it's doable. So for data science perspective, we can build the model for different scoring for the government. it looks more or less perspective. Also for different kind of detection and verification, personal verification, and for now like biometric identification of the people, for different kind of biometrical protocol, because for contemporary condition you don't need your passport, you don't need your credit card, you don't just need your face and your voice. And this combination 100% unhackable. So probably from the government level we should know how many people live in Ukraine at the end, which is we don't know. How many payrolls on like welfare we pay to the people, which is also a point of corruption. So there are a lot of issues we should use with artificial intelligence here. So a lot of application. And for the next question, I'm definitely suppose my colleagues will answer that.
All right, Oleksiy, you're up.
Yeah. For the second, short answer, yes. Of course, we have to be in NATO structures for working in cybersecurity, and we are already working, so it's not a question, it's already in progress. We have at least information for a few months ago, I don't think it's changed something, have 6 different groups where we cooperate in NATO, and the fields where is going is cybersecurity. It's a building of cybersecurity system for Ukrainian army, for SBU, for different. The problem may be that we are spending a little bit resources differently. Maybe better was, or now it's good time to concentrate them, to have the good shield from the viewpoint of understanding what to do on the government level. So it's without any question, yes. In this case, Estonian experience in cybersecurity center for education and in NATO, I think it's one of the best now, at least in Europe, in the world. So we have here just not to reinvent bicycle, we have to do the things which already have to be done from the viewpoint of all countries in Europe who are understanding who is the real enemy and what we have to do in this case.
Thank you. 2 really great questions. On the first, on the implications of AI in judiciary. Actually, it's funny that you ask, because in Estonia, this is a sphere where yet again Estonia is experimenting, and it's the Ministry of Justice that is experimenting with the idea, basically, of having an AI judge. It has to be taken with a grain of salt, but the principle is that as long as the judgment involves with feeding data about legislation, feeding in data about legislation, as well as feeding in various evidence that can be digital, you can have an AI judge. This principle, of course, has to always have the right to redress and human review when a decision is made based on AI, including the ability to correct input data. But this experiment is ongoing currently in Estonia. Regarding the role of international organizations and the need for a new international organization to put into norms on cybersecurity and AI, it is a very topical question. And while I personally don't think that a new organization is needed per se, I do believe very strongly that organizations and entities such as NATO, the European Union, the International Telecommunications Union, and last but not least the UN can, and they do have this conversation about international law applicable in cyberspace and the norms and responsible behavior that is required so that to have a community of like-minded states behaving acceptably when in cyber. And yes, I have to refer to a great work done at the NATO Cyber Center of Excellence in Estonia in this regard, They put out 2 volumes. The latest is called Tallinn Manual 2.0, which is a study of all international law currently, and rule by rule, interpretation by interpretation, listing out a set of recommendations of how international law that is currently existing, how it applies in cyberspace. This work is out there for anybody interested, for any international lawyers and political staffers to get it from Amazon, Tallinn Manual 2.0. But the question is now how nations individually create case studies and precedents, how nations individually interpret this and thereby create enough precedents so that it all comes together into a positive international law. Countries like the UK, US, France, and also Estonia have spelled out at high level some of the principles that they regard in their national practice that fills this international framework with content, but the work must continue, and it will do so first and foremost in the framework of the group of governmental experts in the UN, as far as I know. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Merle. I think we had a really omnivorous conversation touching on pretty much everything you can think of, from autonomous vehicles to healthcare to corruption to NATO to the geopolitics of AI, industrial policy around AI. But I think one thing comes out very clearly, that when we talk about artificial intelligence, we're not talking about a technical issue. We're talking about a moral, ethical, and political issue. And I think that our 3 panelists really brought that out today. So can we give them a round of applause, and then we can go for a coffee. Thank you very much.